Greetings from the Cosmos Foundation. This is Nahar Khan, and it gives me much pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar under our Ambassador Lecture Series on Bangladesh-Netherlands relations, Prognosis for the Future. Today's discussion on relations between Bangladesh and Netherlands will be chaired by Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, President of Cosmos Foundation, followed by the keynote by His Excellency Anne van Leeuwen, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Bangladesh. Subsequently, we will be joined by three distinguished discussants today. Dr. Amina Mohsen, Professor, Department of International Relations at Dhaka University, Dr. Lailufar Yasmin, Professor, Department of International Relations at Dhaka University, and last but not the least, Ambassador Tariq Karim, Honorary Advisor Emeritus of Cosmos Foundation. The Netherlands and Bangladesh have maintained an enduring friendship over the past 50 years and continue to share deep ties. There was a significant Dutch role in Bangladesh's early infrastructural development, water management, and food security efforts, now considered key successes for both countries. Predating the modern-day nation-state, over 400 years ago, the Dutch East India Company left its mark here well before the British arrived, setting up trading outposts in Sherpur, Dhaka, and Rajshahi. The similarities of the two landscapes, with both being low-lying countries prone to flooding with many lakes, rivers, and canals, was not lost on policymakers in the period following Bangladesh's birth. Given the Netherlands' experience of dealing with some of these issues, particularly coastal management, it was natural for the post-independence government in Bangladesh to look to their Dutch counterparts for their expertise. And by all accounts, they were met with a very positive response. The Netherlands has supported Bangladesh through providing financial and technical aid to water resources and coastal management projects. Bangladesh's Delta Development Plan of 1976 was developed with the support of the Dutch government. And it is very reassuring for us that the Dutch embassy in Dhaka was a key participant in finalizing the ambitious Bangladesh Delta Plan, which promises to keep our two nations productively engaged with each other. The Bangladesh Delta Plan provides a key entry point for future collaboration. The objective behind this document is to make the Bangladesh Delta resilient and climate-proof with Dutch expertise, in the words of the Bangladesh ambassador to the Netherlands. Another key focus of the plan is to potentially transform the agriculture sector in Bangladesh, finally providing the much-needed momentum for its modernization. The Netherlands Enterprise Agency, also known as RVO, a part of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, has conducted a number of market scans on Bangladeshi agriculture recently, including on horticulture, aquaculture, and dairy. According to the Bangladesh Embassy in The Hague, the results of these studies vindicate the expectations so far. In keeping with their reputation as the world's foremost experts in water management or living with water, there are no less than 20 water-related programs and projects in Bangladesh being supported by the Dutch government. Apart from the Delta Plan, they range from chore development and settlement, building resilience in communities, sanitation and hygiene projects run through NGOs, to early warning systems for floods. Beyond the Dutch governmental entities, over 30 Dutch NGOs and foundations have been active across a broad band of social and economic development programs in Bangladesh. In April 2021, at the fourth round of Foreign Office consultations between representatives of the two governments, both sides acknowledged the evolving nature of the bilateral relationship with a shift from development cooperation to economic cooperation. I believe the importance of this recognition cannot be overstated, and the future direction of our ties must be anchored in this realization in order to reap the full potential of the bilateral relationship in the days to come. With that, I shall hand it over to our chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, President of Cosmos Foundation and our former Foreign Affairs Advisor, and very much look forward to hearing from the highly distinguished panel we have gathered here today. Dr. Chaudhary.
Thank you, Nahar, and thank you for those remarks and actually for setting out the parameters of our discussions today. And you did it in an excellent fashion, and I want to congratulate you on that. It's for me, of course, an enormous privilege to be chairing and conducting this foundation session webinar on Bangladesh-Netherlands relations, prognosis for the future. I'm doubly delighted that our keynote speaker should be Ambassador Anne van Leeuwen. He's a person whose deep sense of commitment to his duties I found most impressive. I had the occasion not so long ago to spend some time, not inconsiderable time, with him at a social occasion in Dhaka. I was left with no doubt that he was the right man in the right place to help take our bilateral relations from strength to strength. The Dutch and the Bengalis have a historical relationship, as we discussed just before commencing our deliberations today, a relationship that dates back centuries. Now, those involved both politics and trade. Both our countries, of course, are deltaic lands, whether natural or shaped by human ingenuity, sharing a common maritime heritage that have found natural fruition in, say, the efflorescence of water lilies and tulips. Unsurprisingly, upon Bangladesh's independence, our diplomatic relations began almost immediately, I think within a couple of months of Bangladesh's nascence. The Netherlands was a key OECD development cooperation partner right from the very start, right from the get-go. Despite the diversity in our respective endowments and capacities, the common aspirations of, say, resilience, adaptation, and innovation in challenging the vagaries of nature led to bonding of values. I recall as a multilateral diplomat how our two countries had always been supportive of each other on the global scene as well. At the World Trade Organization, the WTO, the Netherlands vigorously championed European initiatives such as Everything But Arms, whose major beneficiary was our garment export industry. Today, I fondly recall Dutch friends as former Development Cooperation Minister Evelyn Hufkens, who had always held our hands in support. In terms of bilateral relations, I see Nahar has mentioned this, the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, and that is truly the key focal point of our collaboration. And very rightly so, you mentioned that it will not only help agricultural production, but not only help the blue economy, but also give an impetus to agricultural production, which will have to acquire great significance in the future, in the post-Ukraine war times, when we have the war behind us, which hopefully will happen soon. Now, to cut to the chase, we have a great lineup of speakers today. We have, as you've heard, Professor Amina Mohsin, Professor Lailufar Yasmin, and of course, Ambassador Tariq Karim. The keynote will be for 30 minutes or so, followed by a 10-minute interventions by each of the three discussants. So without further ado, I shall now invite Ambassador Anne van Leeuwen to the microphone. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. It's such a delight to be joining virtually, but I see the little stamps on my screen with familiar faces. It's a pleasure to be in your midst, and I feel honored and privileged to be invited to speak today in this lecture series. I must say, Nahar and Dr. Iftikhar, you kind of stole my thunder already with the elaborate introductions that you gave and the briefing about the Netherlands and Bangladesh, which were spot on indeed. So I don't know if I'm going to fill the whole 30 minutes. I do not have kind of a prepared statement, but I would like to do a couple of remarks And then I'm looking forward to having an open discussion with each and all of you, because that would be the most interesting part, I think, rather than me telling stories. My introductory remarks would be around three things. I would like to start with some reflections on the first year that I've been here. This is exactly a year now that I've been here as ambassador. Some very brief remarks about Bangladesh and the region, and then going on to the main core of what you invited me to speak about, the future of the relations. But I'd like to start with some personal reflections on my first year here. As a matter of fact, it is this very week, exactly a year that I've been here now. I arrived, I think it was July the 17th or July the 18th or so, together with my wife, 2021. So it's 52 weeks that I've been here as ambassador. And that's a good time to look back and reflect. And I'm going to share with you some candid remarks. I mean, the Dutch are often known to be blunt. I'm not going to be blunt, but what I'd like to do is just to give some off the cuff reflections on that year, and I'm inviting you all to give your feedback on those remarks and observations. It was, let's say, I guess in the early spring of 2021 that I was called by our Director General in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he said I was then ambassador of the Netherlands in Angola in southwestern Africa. And the Director General called me and said, we've decided that we want you to be the next Dutch ambassador in Bangladesh. How do you feel about it? And I said, well, just give me 24 hours. I said, I have to consult with my wife, and I'm going to do some homework because I don't know too much about Bangladesh. It's been some time since I've been following closely developments in Bangladesh. The consultation with my wife was brief because she said, that's a new adventure. We have been in South Asia or Southeast Asia before. We spent 3 years in Jakarta. It's fantastic to be back in Asia. So let's go for it. A new adventure is inviting us. And then, what I thought to myself, I don't know too much about Bangladesh. And what I do then is I start with just going on the internet and you have the Wikipedia and that kind of thing. But there are also, and many people share it with me, I'm just looking it up now. What I do is I just go to, let's say, the Guardian website and the New York Times website, and I try and see, what are the latest articles about Bangladesh. And I just did it 5 minutes ago, and then you see, this is the Guardian. It's about after the flood, about dozens killed by explosion. It's dozens dead, millions stranded as floods ravaged Bangladesh. At least 49 killed and hundreds injured. Every year it gets worse on the front line of the climate crisis until the concert of Bangladesh album review. So this is the Guardian, and the New York Times is kind of the same. It's about fire on a ferry and disastrous floods. So the image, let's say, the news that you get if you're interested in foreign affairs and international relations about what's going on in other countries, and you have those kind of sources, it's quite limited. You get that image of Bangladesh as being indeed a country where factories crumble or go up in fire and ferries capsize. What strikes me, reflecting on the first year now in Bangladesh, is that this is a completely wrong image, of course. If the image of Bangladesh internationally would be indeed a country of floods and capsizing ferries and crumbling and devastated factories, it's totally wrong. And I often quote my two boys who visited me a couple of months ago. They're 28 and they are 30 years of age now. They have their own life in the Netherlands, but they've traveled with my wife and myself around the world. They are worldwide, so to speak. They have been from Africa to Asia, from Australia to Alaska, North and South America. They've been everywhere, and they're clever and intelligent boys. And they were here to visit us for the first time in March or so it was. And when they left after a week, and I asked their assessment of Bangladesh, their view, they had a one-liner that I often quote now, because I think it's the best one-liner about Bangladesh that you can get. They said, you know, that what is so remarkable, what is so stunning and so unique, we find in that observation about Bangladesh, and there comes to one-liner, they say, in Bangladesh, everybody is all the time going somewhere to do something. And that is such a spot-on remark. You know, everybody, literally, nobody is doing it, nothing, is going somewhere, explaining the traffic jams all the time. It's 24/7, but at the end, to do something. And that's the explanation, I feel, for this enormous development that Bangladesh has gone through and the enormous progress it has made in those 50 years of independence, and the incredible growth and development that this country has generated uniquely. And as I compared it to my previous posting when I was ambassador in Angola, the most remarkable thing, of course, is when Angola is rich, but an enormous, it has the curse of richness in the sense that it is oil and gas all over the place and billions of dollars coming out of it. Bangladesh, the only natural resource, more or less, is, you can say, is the people. That's their main assets. That's the capital. And it's unique how the people of Bangladesh are industrious and entrepreneurial and innovative and have contributed so much to development of Bangladesh. So that's the first remark when I reflect on that, how much that is not being reflected in the international media when you read about it. So that's the positive thing. A critical remark, I mean, let's be candid here, that has surprised me when I made my round after arriving here. Of course, as an investor, as you all know, you try to be as broad as possible and meet as many people and representatives as you can in the country that is, you know, host country, with this underlining host country and me being a guest. That's what I'm always aware of, that's my position. I'm a guest and you're my host, and I should behave as a polite guest. But also, you know, I'm interested to hear also sometimes the naughty boys in the family and the critical voices in the family. So I speak to journalists, to academics, to government representatives, to the private sector. And one of the aspects of let's say of Bangladesh that also do not come clear through in the international media, if that's the sort, is I was surprised by how many of my contacts and counterparts were critical about what is often called the shrinking civic space in Bangladesh. You know, the room that there is for dissent, for critical opinions, and about stating your voice. So that's also something that is not widely known, and that really surprised me when I had those conversations with representatives of civil society and media and academics. So that's a remark that I find important to make, and I'm happy to hear your reflections on that point. And a final remark about what has struck me in that year is what I really find amazing every day when I'm reading the newspapers and following the news and political affairs here. I'm struck by the fact how everything almost in Bangladesh is about history and about politics. It is amazing how much history and politics is always key in whatever happens. I find I had a fantastic experience, what is it, in the meantime, 3 weeks ago, I guess, when I was privileged to be among the first who crossed the Patna Bridge. That was a unique event, unforgettable and historic moment in the history of Bangladesh. But also in that beautiful day, that beautiful occasion, that historic occasion, and where all people of Bangladesh can be very, very proud of this huge achievement. Sometimes this, I feel, antagonistic attitude and polarized situation. Again, and I feel, of course, that's the attitude that I think we all share. We are diplomats and scholars in international relations. Our field, of course, is always about building bridges and trying to find common ground. anyway, so this a maybe too long-winded kind of reflection on my first year. I'm quite interested to hear your feedback on those remarks. Then a couple of remarks about Bangladesh and the region, because I think that's also important to make some observations about it. It has been kind of fashionable lately to talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy. I think each and every Ministry of Foreign Affairs around the world now has developed its own Indo-Pacific strategy. For the Netherlands, that means also, how are we looking at the Indo-Pacific? How are we looking at the region? And how are we looking at Bangladesh's position in the region? And I feel it's important for us to find close cooperation in the region, in the Pacific, with like-minded democracies and countries with open market economies that we feel are our natural allies. And in the first place, Bangladesh fits into that category. And I think what we are also having in common with Bangladesh, and where we find common ground, is that we feel it's important for Bangladesh not to be a pawn in the play of great powers, but have your own sovereignty and independence. And that is something where we find Bangladesh and the Netherlands have kind of a similar position. Of course, our Indo-Pacific strategy is from the Netherlands is in the framework, of course, what we do as the EU. And I can only say, of course, the European Union sometimes punches beneath its weight because it's, of course, a superpower in economic sense. I think let me check that. This is a 90 billion annual investment in the region, $90 billion annual investment in the Pacific region, which is among the biggest, of course, in the world. So we feel that we find Bangladesh as a partner in the open market, in the international legal order, democracy and human rights, sustainable trade, security and stability, safe passages on the maritime security. Those kind of things are I feel, important when we look at Bangladesh in the wider region. Now coming to Bangladesh and the Netherlands, the relations that we have. Nahar and Dr. Iftikhar, you gave a very good introductory summary of about the history, how much we have in common. And that's also what I found this last year that I've been here, and had the pleasure and privilege to be the ambassador here. There's so much that we have in common. There's so much that we recognize, and that is in the landscape, in the geography, and in this almost, it's something, I guess, that the Netherlands and Bangladesh and the Dutch people and the Bangladeshi people have in their DNA, that we know how it is to live in the Low Countries. Nederland, the Netherlands, literally translates to the Low Countries, as we are known. And so so is Bangladesh. It's the Low Countries. And we know how, you wake up every day and water can be around. And we have famous Dutch poetry. The best Dutch poetry is about this relation with water and this eternal threat that comes from it, but also the eternal friendship that we have, the contribution that it makes to the fertility of the land and the great prospects for agriculture in the first place. We have made, so we are, as you summarized, I'm not going to repeat the summaries because they were excellent from Dr. Iftikhar and Nahar. We are looking back to 50 years of friendship and cooperation. Those 50 years, of course, first decades have been really on the basis of our official development assistance to Bangladesh. We have always seen Bangladesh as a partner here. Bangladesh has always been in the top of the recipients of official development assistance. And now Bangladesh is on the brink of graduation to a middle income country, which means that we have to recalibrate. So in the next coming years, we will be phasing out our official development assistance relationship with Bangladesh. And that's only testament to the great success of Bangladesh as a economic success. When we make let's say a SWOT, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats analysis, I'm interested to hear your opinion about what we have identified in my team as those spots. When I look at the strengths, of course, Bangladesh is one of the fastest growing economies in the Pacific. It has a relative political stability. It has a large workforce and a demographic dividend, a strong manufacturing infrastructure, and a very strong and growing consumer market due to its expanding middle class. So that's what we identify as the strength when we make a SWOT of the economy. It's particularly an economic SWOT analysis. When we look at the W of the SWOT, the weaknesses, I would like to mention the lack of diversification of the economy. Yeah, what is it, 80 or 90% of the export basket is still in the RMG, so that's absolutely a weakness. The long lead time for shipping of products is something that we see as a weakness, and also let's say the low ranking of Bangladesh in international rankings, the low position in international rankings on, let's say, the ease of doing business and the perception of corruption. That's something that's also absolutely a weakness of Bangladesh, we see. And that is combined with let's say, a bureaucracy that sometimes can be more efficient. Let's put it like that. We come to the O of our SWOT, the opportunities, and I think they are remarkable and big. And that is also, when I mentioned bureaucracy as a weakness, we can also mention a strong in the opportunities, a strong government-led push for improving the business climate. For instance, in the export processing zones that are developed, and the tax incentive for investors. So there are also opportunities being created by the government, and we see that there is an underexplored market where there are huge opportunities and a strong push for digitalization, which enables the leapfrogging opportunities, and of course the domestic market, which is big and growing in let's say, numbers and size, but also in purchasing power. And then coming to the T of the SWOT, there's something like the middle income trap, that the regional competition on labor costs will inevitably rise in Bangladesh, and that might be a threat to its competitive power. And that's also related to the fourth industrial revolution, where automation can rapidly change labor demand to a higher skilled workforce. And I think the main things, and that's also that you hear from friends in let's say, World Bank, IMF, the international financial institutions, it's surprising, I find, the amazing low tax to GDP ratio that Bangladesh has. It's one of the lowest in the world even. And I recently saw figures about the number of taxpayers in this country of 170 million people. It's 7 million or something like that. That's remarkable. So the low tax to GDP ratio and the low foreign investment to GDP ratio is absolutely a weakness and a threat. So that's a bit about the SWOT, and I'm interested to hear reflections on that from the esteemed panelists. Looking forward to the next years, as I said, we are up to make a responsible phasing out, and let's say an exit strategy to our official development assistance. And that's something that we have to do with our partners. In the first place, of course, the government of Bangladesh, but also our non-governmental partners. How are we going to, after 50 years of development cooperation, how are we going to see to it that when we are phasing out our ODA, are having responsible way of making that transition? And of course, the transition is the catchy one-liner as always. It's a transition from aid to trade. And that means that now we are going to try and see our development assistance in a way that we can work on a private sector development, on improving entrepreneurial skills, in having a more conducive business climate. Those are things that we work on. That's on the private sector development part. Another part, of course, as was mentioned by the introduction of Dr. Iftikhar Nahar, is this traditional cooperation in the field of water management and agriculture. We always claim, and rightly so, that the Netherlands is absolutely world class and world top in agriculture, agri-food, and in water management. And those are exactly sectors that Bangladesh, of course, is also very, very skilled in and has huge potential. So we are seeing the next coming years and even decades very, very promising in a closer cooperation in the field of agri-food and water management, with a larger involvement of the private sector. I'm absolutely convinced that it will be a very, very beneficial cooperation where Bangladesh and the Netherlands will benefit, as we always try to strive for, as we call a win-win, where it's not a kind of hit and run by the private sector from whatever side, not from the Bangladeshi side or from the Dutch side. We are partners in trying to find common ground and to work in a win-win situation. I think I've spent my 30 minutes almost on this, and if you allow me, I leave it a bit like here. I rambled on with quite a lot of things, I guess, that might be intriguing for you, and I'm looking forward to your comments and your feedback and the exchange on some of the points that I made. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I'm sure the panelists will react to the points that you have raised. Your, of course, remarks were extremely interesting, starting with the very profound observation of your boys that this is a country where everyone is moving, going from one place to another in order to be able to do something, which is almost a Heraclitean kind of observation, like Heraclitus, that the world is in a flux and you never step into the same Padma twice, because this sort of reflects the dynamism of the society. Coupled with that, of course, you referred to the challenges, the perceptions of the challenges in terms of shrinking civic space, as you said, and you also brought in other factors as a small, the lack of diversity in the economy, as also the governance challenges, together with the fact that you use the metaphor of bridge building. I mean, not just to connect territories, but to connect the differences among values and ethos in the community itself, which is a very, very significant point. And I'm sure our panelists will react to that. You conclude with an analysis, the SWOT analysis. I like that. It's not just an alphabet soup, but it's a useful analytical tool, I think, though you might be accused of cherry picking on your sort of the letters, but nonetheless, that is quite acceptable in literature. I think it's an important contribution, and that is something that we have noted with interest. We will also react to that. Looking at the future, I mean, this transition that you talked of, the movement from aid to trade, of course, that is going to have to happen. To a certain extent, it has happened already. Already, you place us in a sort of global milieu, and from my perch in Singapore, I can observe that very much. You spoke of the Indo-Pacific and relationship. But mind you, we are actually on the shores of the Bay of Bengal itself, you see, which has huge potentials, and many of these untapped. More sort of noticeable now that when we have run into some kind of supply side constraints in terms of energy, etc. Perhaps the blue economy will assume a greater importance against that matrix. So anyway, we shall have, thank you very much. You did very well in these 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. And now it is with great pleasure that I will invite Professor Amina Mohsin. None of our, of course, discussants are strangers to us. She will now speak to the subject for the next 10 minutes or so. Professor Mohsin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and the distinguished guests over here. I guess I've been given only 10 minutes, but there's so much on my platter that I don't know what to address and where to respond and what not to respond. But let me begin with the ambassador's comment about the image issue. Yes, I agree that Bangladesh suffers from an image issue. But, one has to also look at the history of Bangladesh, the political history of Bangladesh. And it is not only a post-colonial state, it is also a post-partition state. So the kind of history that Bangladesh inherited is quite different from the history that one would say the West has. Like in 71, the way we were portrayed, and from there, I would say that we could build the bridge with our own money. So I think we have fought back that image crisis in a big way. But I do agree that there are very strong, I would say, governance issues are there. And what you mention as naughty boys or naughty girls, whatever you would want to categorize them as, about the shrinking spaces for the civil society, all those. Again, maybe this calls for another platform and another discussion, but yes, I do agree that constraints are there, and we are trying to work on it. And there is no denying that how the media has in Bangladesh portrays us, and also how the international media portrays us, that is very critical. But one also has to look that I think here the media, because we are talking to a media platform, the media has a major role to play. And it's not only about good stories, but it is also about, how if the media is portraying the everyday struggles of people's lives, that is also very critical. I mean, when the pandemic happened, we were told that there would be a famine, but Bangladesh did very well. I mean, Bangladesh, our performance was much better than most of the Western countries. And we saw that, the way remittance flow came into Bangladesh, that was something that talked of the collegiality of the people, the social cohesion of the people. And I always argue, in my writings also have written, that it is the society which has taken this country forward. So I make a distinction, I make a very clear distinction between the political and the social. And I always believe that the society in Bangladesh is way ahead than the political society. So this is at a very academic level. I would argue that I make these distinctions, that how the people react to things and how the state reacts to things, different things, that is a different issue. Like, let me come to the Rohingya issue, where, Netherlands has supported Bangladesh, and it stands for international accountability through ICJ and ICC. I mean, who were the first responders? The host community, the local people were the first responders. And they were the ones. And it is unbelievable that a country like Bangladesh, with this kind of an enormous burden of population, is hosting 1.1 billion people. And they're hosting them. I mean, and this is one area, I would say, when the international media focuses upon Bangladesh, they talk of, I'm very conscious of the rights issues, but at the same time, like the burden that the Bangladesh is bearing, that also needs to be portrayed. And there, I think, like I would like to mention and recognize the support of the Dutch government, where they are focusing on the psychological and social well-being of the Rohingya population, reproductive health. I mean, issues which, the livelihood issues of the host community, as well as the Rohingya people. So to say that one is talking of a comprehensive approach to the entire issue. That is something which is very critical, to take a very comprehensive approach, because if we look at the Rohingya issue, I mean, this is a time that the international community takes note of it and recognize the fact that Bangladesh is facing, it's not only, I mean, one has to look into the kind of problems that the host community is also facing. And I mean, when I say this, talk about the securitization of the refugee issue, I mean, one has to be very mindful of the fact that, you know, like this is also a very strategically important area for Bangladesh. And there, you know, like the kind of challenges that Bangladesh is facing, that I believe that the international community has to take into cognizance of that. And why I'm saying that, it's because I've been talking with the host community as well as with the Rohingya people. And this is time where, you know, like something concrete needs to be done on this particular issue, and we expect the Netherlands government to take, you know, to talk of this issue very boldly. And we appreciate the support that we have receiving so far. But this is time, I mean, for action also, because it's almost 5 years now, and people are desperate. Not only the host community, but also the Rohingya people, they are desperate for a kind of a sustainable solution. And living in camps is not the solution. I mean, this is not a life that people can have. So these are issues, I think, that where we have substantial grounds for cooperation and taking the our relationship forward. Let me come to another area from where Bangladesh has, you know, suffered for a long time from image issue, that's violent extremism. Well, I remember once Bangladesh was even, you know, like there was an article where Bangladesh was, I mean, there were projections that Bangladesh is becoming a cocoon of terror, or Bangladesh will become the next Taliban. If you look at the global terrorism index today, Bangladesh has done remarkably well. And there we appreciate, you know, the kind of, it's not only because Bangladesh government, of course, the Bangladesh government zero tolerance policy was a major factor behind it, but also we appreciate the intelligence support, the international cooperation that was there. That, I mean, these are factors. And here, you know, like Netherlands provides a very good example, because I was looking at the violent extremism, because I work on violent extremism. So I was looking at the best practices of many of the countries, including the Western countries. If we look at the CV, or the counter violent extremism mechanism of the Netherlands government, we find that there is one particular strategy, apart from the 5 pillars that the Netherlands government has adopted. One is which I found to be very important and critical, is they are very particular that in their counter-violent extremist strategy, that there should not be any categorization of the in-group and the out-group. And there should not be any derogatory remarks on that. I think this is a very good example. And not only in Bangladesh, we are trying our best to carry on interfaith as well as intrafaith dialogues. But I think the West also has a lot to learn, because this categorization has been a major problem with, and the very fact that the Netherlands government looks at violent extremism as a political and psychosocial problem, and as a process, as a process-oriented thing, that is something I find lacking in some of the policy documents of the major Western powers on violent extremism. But this being there at the, with the Dutch government, I would say this is a major, this is something where Bangladesh and Netherlands can cooperate. And if one talks of preventing violent extremism, Bangladesh has gone for community engagement. Netherlands government also has gone for community engagement. So these are areas where, the two countries can learn from each other. I'll be wrapping up, Ambassador Chaudhary, very soon. Then let me come to the issue of gender equality and knowledge sharing. This, I'm grateful to the Netherlands government, and I recognize because I was also closely involved in the entire process when the Department of Women's Studies was set up at Dhaka University, which later on became the Women and Gender Studies Department. And today, I would like to recall and recognize Dr. Najma Chaudhary, Dr. Najmunnisa Mahtab, Dr. Mahmouda Islam, Dr. Sadika Halim Chaudhary, who were like the building blocks to this, to the establishment of this department. And this Gender and Women and Gender Studies Department has done a lot, in mainstreaming or in the imparting of knowledge on gender equality. And I'm proud to say that my department, Department of International Relations, was one of the first departments, even before the Department of Women's Studies was set up, which later became Women and Gender Studies. At Dhaka University, we were one of the first departments, International Relations Department, to mainstream gender equality or gender studies into international relations. And when, when we talk of SDG Goal 5, I think there Bangladesh has done remarkably well. In terms of gender equality in South Asia, in terms of gender equality, Bangladesh ranks the highest in terms of gender gap. We are aware of Netherlands' approach for having a feminist foreign policy. I think we can open up a conversation between the women of the North and the women of the South, and to see what it means to have a feminist foreign policy. When we talk of a feminist foreign policy, it's not only about having women, it's also about institutions. It's also about how you look at the concept of peace, how you look at the concept of security. And I think both Bangladesh and Netherlands have a long there are different paths of cooperation, and we can look forward to it, that how we can move towards these issues. I mean, giving refuge to the Rohingya refugees was one of the major planks of human security. When we talk about water diplomacy, I'm not going to go into the details of it because it has been talked about here, but then water diplomacy is anchored or moved into what we call human security. And personally, I have written also on it that I do not believe in this categorization of soft diplomacy or hardcore diplomacy, because I think these are artificial dichotomies which creates how you prioritize your policies. And as you mentioned, that we suffer from image problems, and there are issues corruption issues are there, how you do trade, diversification of economic platform. This is something we have been talking about a lot, that if we look at the major planks of Bangladesh economy, I mean, the RMG sector and our remittance from the migrant workers are the major planks of our economies. And we do recognize, I mean, the COVID has taught us that Bangladesh needs to diversify. And this platform, the e-commerce, came out very strongly. And the informal economy and it was something to be seen that how suddenly we all went virtual. And I mean, I teach, and Dr. Lailufa Yasmin also, we both teach in the same department, how we dealt with the digital divide. And I think there the Netherlands government has a lot to do. I mean, in terms of what do we do in terms of, because I was talking about knowledge sharing and the establishment of the Department of Women Studies, and or which now has become Women and Gender Studies Department. And it was not only the establishment of the department. I mean, the Netherlands government also. I'm just wrapping up. The Netherlands government also did with the capacity building and of the faculty members, and finally with the blue economy and the Indo-Pacific. I would like to conclude by saying that Bangladesh, I think, would like to keep its options open over here, because Bangladesh, as a sovereign country, would like to see that how it, I would not say balance, but what are the strategic options for Bangladesh, and Bangladesh would opt to choose from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. I mean, very, very rich and profound remarks. It is very interesting that you make that distinction between what you call the social society, political society. I mean, it has been compared as civil society versus political society in the analysis of people like Partha Chatterjee. Partha Chatterjee also under the tutelage of his mentor, Borun Dey of the Calcutta Institute. But that's a very interesting analysis, how when the social society sort of overtakes the political society in the post-colonial era, the kind of pressures it creates on the community. That is a very interesting study, and I think Bangladesh is a very important subject in that area. You go on to say other very important subjects, such as Netherlands' contribution in the tackling of the CVE, the countering violent extremism, and the kind of the parameters philosophically that the Netherlands gives forth, and which is a lesson to learn for the Europeans. I was very pleased to hear of what the Department of International Relations. I didn't spend very long at the Dhaka University, but not at all in the Department of International Relations. But what you have been doing in terms of building these foundations of mainstreaming women in international relations as such. You mentioned Netherlands in that context. In my earlier remarks, I had referred to a person called Evelyn Herskens, who was a minister in the Netherlands. She and 5 other European ministers of development cooperation, all of whom were women in the late 90s. They formed a group called Uchstein Sisters. And the Uchstein Sisters, this is named after a premise that they had met in Germany. And the Uchstein were devoted to exactly what we were talking about, how to sort of gender mainstream development cooperation. So that was a very, very interesting, I thought, contribution of course, all these European ladies. There was Claire Short, I remember. There was Mrs. Johnson. There was Elizabeth Palmer from Sweden. But I was very pleased to hear that at an academic level, both you and Professor Yasmin have been building on the building blocks as established by others who have gone before you. Thank you so much for those remarks. Now, Lailufa Yasmin, the floor is yours, and we are raring to go to hear your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, and the Cosmos Foundation, and Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhary, and after my professor talks here, my direct teacher talks here, I find it's so not only intimidating, it's like, I'm sitting for the exam and I've forgotten all my, what to answer. So it's almost like that. So I would actually talk about it from a little different point of view, which I'm sure His Excellency and already knows about it. We already had spoken about it, about Bangladesh's, importance to the rest of the world. Why? I know the question that I raised a couple of months ago, that visibly Bangladesh does not have any important natural resources, but why then countries of the world, different parts of the world, they are coming to Bangladesh? This is a question I tend to ask to a lot of ambassadors and diplomats here, and often I find that the answer is often not very direct, or because the answer is not lying there, answer is sort of can be found in a multi-layered manner. So what plan today is to talk about, how bilateral relationship takes shape. Bilateral relationship cannot be based on zero-sum game. It is based on relative gain, that each of the countries, they find and emphasize on each other's strength, each other's weaknesses, and they try to sort of fill those gaps so that they both can grow simultaneously. And especially in today's world where it is ridden with a pandemic, which is turned into an endemic. We have a number of crises going on, food crisis, strategic crises, and other kind of crises. So how can Netherlands and Bangladesh can sort of work alongside to fight against this kind of crisis? So I see that there are always strategic objectives laid out by respective governments, in this case Bangladesh and Netherlands, and also tactical options through which the strategic goals are maximized, the strategic goals are fulfilled. So first I shall start with, for last 2 years, especially as Bangladesh has celebrated 50 years of its journey as a sovereign nation, we can see that a number of countries are interested to come to Bangladesh. It is often argued in Bangladesh that Bangladesh's rising strategic importance is not understood by Bangladeshis. Rather, it is being emphasized and it is being talked about in the circle outside of Bangladesh. So we often ask them that why are you coming to Bangladesh, and they tell us that you do not know what strategic importance you hold. So that is where I would like to point out that from Bangladesh, I can identify three particular strength that Bangladesh has, which often we fail to recognize. Number one, at the maritime sector, Bangladesh's location at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal, which originally the writings of late 70s, early 80s, even 90s, you would find that our scholars have written about Bangladesh being a landlocked country, Bangladesh being an India-locked country, because Bangladesh did not have unfettered access to the Bay of Bengal. So from being a landlocked country or India-locked country or a victim of geography, Bangladesh now stands as a blessings of geography. So what can this mean for Bangladesh in real term? It can mean that Bangladesh can provide access to the landlocked region of Northeast India. Remember, Northeast India shares only 2% of its territory with the main, with the Indian territory, but a majority of its, land is shared with either Bangladesh or China or Bhutan and Myanmar. So Bangladesh can provide access to the landlocked territories of Northeast India, Bangladesh's port, Mongla port, Chattogram port. These can be provide access to two other landlocked countries of this region, Nepal and Bhutan. So here Bangladesh holds a huge strategic potential by spreading, by being able to providing access in the Bay of Bengal for these landlocked regions. Number two, the land-centric importance of Bangladesh. We often forget what is the importance of Siliguri corridor for India, for both India and China. So Bangladesh is at the crossroad. Bangladesh has, is sitting on that chicken snake, and Bangladesh's strategic importance cannot be denied. Number three, something that His Excellency has pointed out, demography as natural resources. I was coming to this point because it is because of demographic factor. It is because of Bangladesh being a large country in terms of 170 million people. people, where we can see an unique possibility that Bangladesh can offer, not only in terms of providing low-cost labor, but also Bangladesh gradually is moving to providing, semi-skilled labor in other parts of the world. For example, we are Maldives is talking with Bangladesh in sort of exchanging high-skilled labor, such as in high-skilled labor in medical sector. Bangladesh is increasingly turning into a hub of medicine learning in the entire South Asia, where people from South Asian countries are coming here to study medicine. And also Bangladesh is now providing, garment workers and skilled in garment RMG technology to Europe and to other parts of the world. So these are something we need to remember. And a demographic factor is not only limited to demographic dividend, but also the sheer market number of people that holds a market for products. This is something we need to pay attention to. Then let me come to Bangladesh's export items, and here comes a critical relationship with Netherlands. Bangladesh's major export item is RMG, as we all know, and its key destinations are in the United States of America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So here, we often have not paid attention that the importance of Rotterdam port. Unfortunately, I could not find the latest data, but I have a bit of old data. So all export of Bangladesh's RMG to Germany and the Netherlands, as well as 50% of all the export to the EU goes through Rotterdam port. This is something we often fail to emphasize while we talk about bilateral relations. So here I have a very like 10 years old data. Rotterdam port from Bangladesh used to handle 11,151 containers per month, which would mean 35 men per hour in Rotterdam port, which would mean there would be Rotterdam port would need about 100,000 people per hour. That is the per hour labor that they have to provide. And it would create 440 jobs in Rotterdam port alone, which is dealing with Bangladesh's RMG export to Rotterdam. So I'm sure this data has developed much, because we need to remember that Bangladesh's total RMG, 12% goes to Netherlands, and direct shipping has started from the month of May between Rotterdam port and Bangladesh. So this has often we see international relations from a very strategic point of view, but economic security, economic areas, especially with the disruption in the global supply chain and the way pandemic unfolded, we now need to pay attention to these areas. So here we can see that direct shipping to Rotterdam port now would take 20 days, only 20 days, and it will cut down to freight cost about 20 to 30% from earlier. So this will significantly change the course of bilateral relations, where direct business connectivity between, as His Excellency talked about, bridge connectivity, how it can create new kind of relationships. So now we are talking about, business connectivity between Netherlands and Bangladesh. So here the route that has been selected is that from Chattogram, the RMG products would go to Rotterdam port. It will unload, then it will bring in necessary import items, come to Liverpool in UK, being more, import items, and come back to Dhaka, come back to Chattogram directly. So this entire, sort of business aspect of Bangladesh-Netherlands relations, it has hardly been, emphasized. And here we are talking about not only zero-sum game, but relative gain between the Netherlands and, Netherlands and Bangladesh. So here, one area. Then I can see the Indo-Pacific, His Excellency has mentioned about Indo-Pacific strategy of Netherlands, and Netherlands provides one of the unique opportunity for other countries in the Indo-Pacific region, where it talks about, a third country providing cooperation in two areas: maritime security cooperation and digital connectivity. So this is where Netherlands can be a very important partner for Bangladesh. As you all must be aware of, that Bangladesh has not yet formulated its own Indo-Pacific strategy, but Bangladesh is working on formulating its Indo-Pacific vision. So under Bangladesh's IPV, it is pointing out what are the areas that are important for Bangladesh to look into when it comes to, larger geopolitical game of the Indo-Pacific region. So here, I would like to point out, and as His Excellency or His Excellency has also pointed out, that diversification of Bangladesh's trade, semiconductor industry, an area that where Bangladesh is increasingly trying to make its mark. So in Bangladesh, one of the Intel former employees, she has returned back to Bangladesh and trying to create Bangladesh as a Silicon Valley, as a Silicon Valley where Bangladesh can grab some of the share of a global semiconductor industry market. In 2020, the market stood to US $425 billion. Bangladesh only contributes, only earns a meager $5 million. So we know already the kind of cheap fight, semiconductor industry cheap fight going on between America and China, where Netherlands may play a very important role. If His Excellency must be, of course, is aware about it. 3 to 5 nanometer chip producing. Samsung is the first company globally which is going to 3 nanometer chip production. But Netherlands makes the finest chips so far in the world. Although we must not forget that Taiwan contributes Taiwan has a share of 85% of the market in the whole entire semiconductor industry. So, but Netherlands has made a difference by going to 3 to 5 nanometer chip producing, and how the IP rights, there's a fight between America and China over the IP fights. And now, the latest reports say that Netherlands is going to open the market for providing nano, IP rights to China as well, because China is also breaking through in developing its, IP rights on 3 to 5 nanometer production of chips. So here, this is another interesting area. So Bangladesh has so far about 100 spatial economic zones. So investment from Netherlands in developing semiconductor industry, which would fall under digital connectivity and digital areas of IPS in the Pacific strategy of the Netherlands. So that is another area I would recommend to further develop Bangladesh-Netherlands relations. So what is the incentive for Netherlands? That labor cost is much higher in other parts of the world when it comes to semiconductor industry, but Bangladesh so far can provide the cheapest labor, which is in US dollar 101 only. This is much less compared to other countries of the world. So here Bangladesh holds a very interesting area where Netherlands might be interested. Then another area, firstly, that His Excellency mentioned, image crisis. So we actually, I've written about it, and Amena Madam was the editor where my article was published. I've written that in Bangladesh, we have very little faith in ourselves. So we tend to think that, no, we have not grown up and we need a pat in the back from the others, and we are it used to be being very polite, but now it has become because it is the moment that Bangladesh needs to seize, and Bangladesh needs positive PR in international media, as His Excellency started by saying the image crisis that Bangladesh suffers from, not only from here but from other foreign diplomats or political affairs officer. From them I continuously hear this, that whenever you talk about anyone about Bangladesh, they know Bangladesh as a country full with disasters or political violence. And even when during my last 6 weeks fellowship in the APCSS, Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii, I learned that very few people have any idea that Bangladesh exists. By South Asia, they mean either India or India-Pakistan, but that Bangladesh exists, very few people. Where Southeast Asians were there, where people from Africa were there, very few had any idea about Bangladesh. So we need this positive PR, and I hope His Excellency would be writing about Bangladesh in Dutch media and introduce Bangladesh, how Bangladesh has been able to fight positively during the pandemic period, because there has been no death in pandemic due to a food crisis. This is where Bangladesh can emphasize that how it has come a long way in last 50 years. And then another area, there's something that has been mentioned by Madam earlier, that Bangladesh's policies on gender mainstreaming, especially under the Women, Peace, Security agenda recommended by UN, by the United Nations, where Bangladesh has been a shining example, actually one of the few countries that has been able to carry out gender mainstreaming policies involving, other ministries. So Ministry of Foreign Affairs is taking the lead in, implementing national action plan on women's development with concerted effort from other 12 ministries. So this coordination is something unprecedented. In my, presentation on WPS, Women, Peace and Security under UN Resolution 1325, I have seen that how other countries are struggling, but Bangladesh has been a champion in this area. In today's newspaper, in fact, I saw that Bangladesh is, I don't want to mention it that way, but it may sound like that first in promoting primary education in the entire South Asia. Bangladesh is, women's economic participation is highest in the entire South Asia, which is about 34, little over 34%. Bangladesh's women's engagement in economic activities. In case of political participation, Bangladesh stands much higher than any other South Asian country. So we can see there are many other areas that Bangladesh can promote its image and can promote itself as a champion. And in the climate, the climate catastrophe that we are going through right now, Bangladesh has been able, working with, scientists from other countries. Bangladesh has been able to develop saline resistant crop. So this is something that how we are developing in different areas, but there are no manifestation of this, because we need a speaker from Bangladesh. We need a speaker from outside of Bangladesh who needs to talk about this more and more. Last but not the least, I would talk about, in the areas of research. Netherlands is one of the countries which has active interest in understanding Bangladesh's history, society, politics. So one of the best books on Bangladesh is written by a Dutch scholar, Willem von Schandel, A History of Bangladesh. This is something we recommend everywhere to understand Bangladesh, to learn about Bangladesh's society, politics, religion. We need to read that. Yes, I'm just finishing off. We recommend that book. And not only that, University of Ghent, University of Antwerp, a number of universities now have experts on Bangladesh who work on the Bangladesh's student politics and Bangladesh's society, Bangladesh's rise of violent extremism, and all of these areas. So I believe that we need this more positive engagement that we have with Netherlands, and we need to flourish it in the long run. So thank you very much for inviting me here. If any questions, I'll be happy to answer later.
Thank you, Lalifar. It was an excellent, very spirited presentation, and you packed in a lot of material into that time frame. You, of course, began theoretically as to how bilateral relations don't grow in a vacuum, but you provided theoretical metrics for the evolution of bilateral relations and how it seems so important to sort of choose the appropriate tactical options in order to maximize your strategic goals. Then you went into great details in the point that you made about semiconductors, by the way. I mean, we did have a discussion on semiconductors in this forum once before. One point, it's almost like a question. You sort of tried to match Netherlands' technical expertise with cheaper labor in Bangladesh, but semiconductors is such a field which is so high up in the niche area of manufacturing that the cheapness of labor is not necessarily an important factor in production. I just wanted to make the point. The other thing is, it's for the ambassador to react. At some point in time, you will probably need to respond to queries with regard to market access. Now, this hasn't come up so much as yet. Though Lalifar mentioned this 12%, this thing in Rotterdam and all that, but she was specific to the Netherlands. But how the European Union is going to react to the graduation? I mean, this is the $100, $1 million, whatever you call because of inflation, we no longer call it $1 million question, we call it $1 billion question now. $1 billion question is how the European Union is going to react to the graduation from LDCs, and has Ambassador any thoughts with regard to this? So thank you so much, Professor Yasmin. And now it's my great honor and pleasure to recognize Ambassador Tariq Karim, a very respected member of our diplomatic community, and in many ways, my mentor, Ambassador Karim.
It's a pleasure indeed to be here this morning. Thank you, Cosmos, for inviting me to speak, share some of my thoughts. And I'm particularly delighted to be sharing the same screen with Ambassador Ane, with whom, if I may say so, we have developed a sort of friendship, which is continuing from the time when I first met his predecessor, Harry. And I remember it was I who told Harry in perhaps our first meeting, when I too had more or less come back to live in Bangladesh after having stayed away for 20 years, my impressions of how I saw the changes that had taken place in Bangladesh. And I said, the first change that I notice is, look at the people. Look at how everyone I see when I'm stuck at a traffic jam, yes, there are a handful of beggars there already, but they are going from somewhere to somewhere, and they are intent on doing something. They have some purpose in their movement. And I think Harry was struck by that remark, and perhaps he may have passed that on to you. I said, I'm still learning about the Bangladesh that I left behind 20 years ago. And I think there are fundamental changes here. So I will try and fill in some of the impressions that I myself have had through this learning experience. I distance myself to try and understand my own country and region better, because I believe that distance lends objectivity to the view. I needed to get away to try and figure out why we were so irrational sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, why we were so consumed in what appears to be almost self-destruction. And I think one of the things I've written about that, and Professor Amina Mohsin also mentioned, our legacy of history. You mentioned about our preoccupation with history and with politics. Yes, if you read Amartya Sen's The Argumentative Bengali, then you will know that Bangladesh is where, or Bengal is the crucible for the development of modern political movements. And there is, it's attributed to Bengal that what Bengal thinks today, the rest of India thinks tomorrow. I think we have lived up to that maxim quite well, and we continue to do that even today. In a recent talk in Brussels, when I had to talk about 50 years of developmental progress of journey of Bangladesh, I said, how has Bangladesh come from there in 1972, when we were literally a wasteland, when we had been written off as a state that cannot possibly survive? And as a political economist, standing where Alexis Johnson was at that time, I probably would have said the same, that how can the state survive? It has no resources. Is India locked? In that world, being anything locked was disaster at that time. So we are inheritors of a very twisted history. Why is Bangladesh, you mentioned about a deeply divisive society. Yes, it is. I have talked about this even when I was in the US. It's I've in my talk to the Foreign Service Academy in the United States, I've said, you're going to a very schizophrenic society, a schizoid polity. When Bangladesh emerged as a free nation state in 71, we could state, in fact, we did say that we are the only homogeneous nation state in the post-colonial new Westphalian disorder that we emerged into after 1945. All of South Asia is split, but the splits are along various different lines. their ethnic or race or caste or creed or religion. Bangladesh here suddenly emerges as a country, 98% ethnic Bengalis, 88% Sunni Muslims, no division between Shias and Sunnis or Wahhabis or etc. coming in. So in a sense, how is it that we became so politically schizophrenic? Our division is a political division within our mind, and that is the inheritance, I would say, of two partitions that we inherited, three partitions now. I've always talked of two, and Professor Amira Mohsin just triggered off something, that there is a third partition that also affected us. The two partitions we talk about are the one in 47 and the one in 71. That creates tremendous pressures and dissonance within the way we think, within the way we approach. Because any two human beings looking at any one stimulus will react to that in a different manner. That is the nature of human being. And therefore divisions occur. Now it's up to the human beings to figure out how they arrive at an equilibrium point, and instead of killing each other, trying to resolve that, okay, there is a middle space somewhere and we can still live with our thoughts. We have not yet evolved to that. Now, so I mentioned the two partitions. What's the third? The third partition, which I think, and I've talked about it extensively in my own writings, is that we were midwifed by the Cold War. When we emerged as a state, the Cold War was peaking at a certain height. It had another height later on, but at that point, it was a very visceral height. Okay. And we were we were the Berlin in the Cold War tussle that was taking place, with Pakistan on one side and India on the other. And we had our own national aspirations of getting rid of colonialism, hence our antagonism to colonialism. It was not just British colonialism. Our immediate struggle after independence was against Pakistani colonialism. Okay, so all these things made us a very complex state to begin with. Now, charges of what you have said, you've alluded to that very gently and very graciously, about lack of governance, about the shrinking civic space, about various other things. Now, this is something, I've been listening to this since I grew up in this country from 1948 onwards. Okay. So I am perhaps in that term, in terms of times past, Bangladesh is 2.5 generations since 71. You can add another 2 generations on. I have that history of having watched different things coming at us when we were East Pakistan and then after Bangladesh. The charges are more or less the same throughout. You do an analysis of that, with a time frame, and you will see which government was in power and which foreign countries leveled which charges. They're more or less the same. Okay. And yet, you have this phenomenon where this state, which should not have theoretically been able to survive, has come from 1972 to 2022, on the verge of 2023, as one of the fastest growing economies, not just in the region, but also globally, with some of the human development indices, which put to shame many of the neighbors who used to say, look, we are better off. And Sri Lanka was one of them. India still claims to be that, but I think they do it with less vociferous now than they did previously. They do sometimes acknowledge that we are doing better than them in terms of gender parity or literacy, etc. In a lot of things. How did we do that? I think that is the dilemma that all of you should be trying to address. It is the human element of Bangladesh that has made it possible. Our population is, as you rightly said, Ane, it is our biggest asset. And added to that, right now we are at a point where we have the youth dividend. Then I think it was mentioned by somebody that we moving forward? We are always very defensive. We are very That's what makes us so polite, because, people, we are aware of our shortcomings. I think that has changed. When I've been associated with 2 universities since the time I came back here 4.5 years ago or 5 years ago. The students I see today, they have hormones racing in their circulatory system. They exude confidence. Perhaps I'm a little worried. They exude overconfidence. They are looking forward. They're not looking back. They do not want to be cajoled or pushed into a position by anybody. That gives a sense of collective independence, which is different from the independence we achieved in 1972. Okay, you've got to understand this. Now, coming back to that analogy I gave, that everybody is moving forward, everybody is going from somewhere to some place to someplace else. I would add a corollary to that. The corollary is everybody wants to get ahead of everybody else, no matter what the cost. And I think watching the traffic for 10 minutes, you stuck at any intersection for 10 minutes, you will find out why. You'll find the rickshaws trying to manipulate between the 10 inches they have, the gap they have between 2 cars. You'll find the scooters, the motorized motorcycles doing the same. They will ride over the cars if possible, or develop wings, sprout wings and fly. You'll find people honking incessantly as if the car in front will develop wings and start flying like a helicopter anytime to clear the way for them. This impatience, that needs to be challenged or channeled. We need to learn how to channel it. Now, I'll come back to another factor that you mentioned. It's the factor, the democracy quotient. I had to address this quotient, this question, very aggressive questions on this when I was in the States, particularly in the mid-2000s. And my answer was simply this, that listen, if the democracy quotient, until then, if elections are held and people are allowed to vote, even the US does not have the turnout of voting that we have. In a free and fair election, those that have been certified by the global community, we have had 70% plus turnout. In the US, the highest turnout was perhaps 48% in any given time. So I said, what makes you a better democracy than us? Because if you split the votes down the line, one party who emerged gets only 50% of what the total votes were cast. And then within that parties there are. So how do you define democracy? In a sense, we are in a debate now where there are 2 ends of the spectrum in democracy. You have, and so in a sense, we are also seeing that playing out here in the larger questions in which we have become the nut in the nutcracker's jaws. Okay. Is there any perfect democracy anywhere in the world today? Can anyone say we are perfect democracy? Democracy, by its very, very definition, means people. Democracy, by the term that we understand it, depends on a charter. Charters are man-made. The US charter, the Constitution, was almost 250 years old. That, in a sense, is the most difficult charter to amend. In the 250 years, they have only had, I think, as of today, maybe 28 amendments, of which the first 10 amendments were in the first month. So essentially, they have had only 14 amendments in these 240 years. Okay. But human beings are not static. They are dynamic. They change with every generation. I think differently from how my father thought. My father thought differently from how his father thought. That's how it goes. That is progress. That is civilization. And so basically, it's human beings who will shape how we go forward. If Bangladesh has, and even if we accept, which I will contest, perhaps to some degree, that if Bangladesh has lacked from good governance from so many years consistently, why or how did we manage to come this far? the human being somehow managed to steer a course. And there is, of course, the instinct of self-preservation and survival. The people at the top supposedly ruling them, and that can be sometimes very, very fallacious or deceptive, who's ruling and who's being ruled, they have to adapt, they will swing. I think what you have to see in this context is that we have demonstrated that from a new Westphalian state that had emerged after 1945, we were a state that survived. It should not have survived. We managed to survive, and we did very well in comparison with many others, whether in our part of the world or elsewhere. Number two, I think the reasons for survival, it's people. There have been times, Bangladeshis are by nature, their threshold for tolerance of pain is very high. They will tolerate a lot of pain being inflicted on them. But when they reach a collective ouch point, like a human being, every human being has an ouch point. You can sustain a pinprick up to a point where you say, ouch, that hurts. When that ouch point is reached collectively by society as a collective, they burst. And when they burst, changes happen. And so again, if you track the periods of changes, that's how it has happened. Now, I hope our rulers will also learn from the same lesson that you need to change, you need to adapt. We should not be at the dark end of the spectrum. We will perhaps not reach the ideal white end of the spectrum. We will always be operating somewhere in the gray zones in between. That's what every democracy does. It's a question of how the people will shape it to become the democracy they want. There is no one shoe fits all in any democracy anywhere. Even the Americans are going through a huge churning. I don't know whether they are going back to the elitist oligarchy which was established with the Constitution, or whether they will still manage to hold on to some of the rights which the people have wrested through many revolutions over the 2 centuries. So in a sense, we are constantly in a state of revolution. We hope that it will be a peaceful, pacific revolution which will change. And I have a feeling that governments, whichever government comes or goes, will have the sense to understand that for their own self-preservation, they need to make course corrections. And I think now, where after 50 years, we find ourselves at a sweet spot in terms of economic security for our people, which includes a lot of things. Whether they have a reasonably decent income, do they have food available, etc., etc. Now, is the time when you start fixing your institutions. Is the time when you start disciplining your traffic. And the minute you try to discipline traffic, you will have to deal with a plethora of issues. You will have to teach about fixing your curriculum, to teach the children from the primary grades onward, what is civic sense? Is it only your rights for yourself, or does your rights also entail responsibility to the state and to other people? You will have to teach them, okay, if we have rules, you have to follow the rules. If you do not follow the rules, you have to pay a penalty. And so it will be a progression. So I think we are now in a transition from the first phase of having attained economic stability and security to now stabilizing ourselves politically. It will not be easy. It will not be always calm. We will have painful, perhaps even squally weather ahead, but it will happen. That is the confidence I have, having seen the present Bangladesh grow up to where it is from what it was East Pakistan in 1947-48. And so I will, oh yes, why? I think somebody asked the question, why is everybody's attention now? Was it you, Lailufer, or was it was Professor Amina Mohsin?
Yeah, it was me
Okay.
saying
Okay.
that. Yeah.
And I have asked this same question. Today, after 45, the focus of all the great powers, and the great powers were the winners, was on the Pacific arena and partly on the Atlantic. Then it shifted mostly to the Atlantic Alliance. Then it has now shifted to Asia. Why? Because if you look at the trade figures of what the Indian Ocean carries, that says it all. Now, if you look at the Indian Ocean, then, why is this shifting thing? And I would go back to Admiral Mahan's thesis, which he wrote, which basically was the thesis which guided US naval power to come and become the naval power and be mightier than every other. The lessons he drew, I think that is being adapted here. Today, it is the Indian Ocean, which is the most important ocean in the world. And I have been provocative and challenged everyone, and I'm even challenging Bangladeshis to do so. Look at yourself differently. Yes, we are landlocked, but why is the planet Earth called Earth? Because some human being on some terrestrial spot somewhere, he cannot see beyond that, eons ago said, this is Earth. But today, there's a Captain Kirk with a spaceship coming from some outer galaxy. He's looking for new planets. He discovers Earth in our galaxy. And he says, this is strange. This is 71% is a blue planet. Why? There are 5 oceans, huge oceans with 7 continents in it. And if you look at the configuration, now if we can detach ourselves from a body and float above, we would see 5 oceans: Pacific, Arctic, Atlantic, Southern or Antarctic, and right in the center is the Indian Ocean. You zoom in further, you see the Bay of Bengal. You zoom in even further and you see Bangladesh sitting there, right at the apex of the Bay of Bengal. I'm telling Bangladeshis and others that we are at the epicenter of this oceanic world, which I would have named Oceania and not Earth had I been discovering it for the first time. That gives me a different perspective of what I am, what I could be in the future. And actually, when we go back to what Professor Amina Mohsin was saying, what we were previously, historically, Bengal was the richest entity in India as it was known. And I'm talking of India as the civilizational, historical India. Okay, so we suddenly are beginning to realize, we have not yet fully grasped it, I think, that we are at the epicenter of this global competition that is going to now focus on the Indian Ocean. That is why even the European Union has created a cell for Indo-Pacific affairs now, which is very recent. It was created, I think, last year. Why? It's the same reasons. We used to facilitate traders, civilizations, cultures coming from the West to the East and vice versa, which gave us a relevance and an importance which even we did not understand in those times. We are a bridge nation. We understand it better now. That's why we are going in, we are asking other countries to help us. We will have from the 1 seaport we had to the 2 to 3 with Paira and with Matarbari coming in as the real deep sea port, perhaps in the next 24 months or less. We are reconnecting all the connectivities that were there. The British understood it. The other colonial powers did not, which came before did not. The British understood it best. They put in the railways, used our river routes. That is what gave us a centrality. And they used it for extraction. My argument is help us to use it for our own development. And this is where Netherlands can. We are endangered, and Netherlands understands that better than any other country because 70% of your population lives below the sea level at different levels. Ours is not so much, but we are still in danger. You have learned how to cope with it. we are still struggling with it. Our problem is you are helping us with the Delta plan. And I come now to the crux of the problem, which nobody has touched upon. Professor Amina Mohsin mentioned briefly. The Delta plan will not succeed unless we can come at a deal with our upper riparian neighbors about how the rivers and the river basins will be managed. This plan will fall flat on its face. And therefore, we have to learn how to do our diplomacy, conduct it in a manner that we can ensure that our delta does not die. If the source of the delta dies, we die. If we die, today we are 170 million people, plus or minus. 2011, what will be the population? If the Delta plan does not succeed, you now start extrapolating from there what was likely to happen. It was touched upon by Professor Mohsin when she mentioned the Rohingya. The Rohingya is just a small blob. Even though the governments will hold fast to the view that they are not ours, they have to go back, but they cannot live in camps forever. We know what happens to refugees who live in camps for generations after generations for the last 70 years. So that's not the way to go. We are the most densely packed population in this planet, the country, as a state. If we cannot manage this, and what's happening today, the crisis that we see alarm bells ringing. Are we going to go into a state like Sri Lanka is? And so the measures will be taken. They will appear to be draconian, but the government must do what it must to try and save this ship from sinking lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, so they will be tightening measures. But over the last 50 years, we managed the macroeconomics, despite whichever government was in place, fairly well, reasonably stable, in a stable manner. And my confidence comes from that experience is the biggest teacher. We will have learned from that accumulated experience how to go through this crisis. But this Ukraine crisis is not going to end, whatever the optimistic prognosis is in Europe or elsewhere, is going to drag on, and it's going to have an effect on all of us in one way or the other. It's already having on gas prices, on energy costs and prices. That will translate into food, into transportation, X, Y, Z, and so on. So we will have to learn to cope with this. I think for us, we have to imagine the worst case scenario, and that is probably what the government will try and do now. That's my guess. I hope so. If they are not, then we are in for real problems. That this crisis is not going to end overnight, whatever anyone says. It is going to have multiple fallouts on the whole of how we manage our economics and politics, and therefore we have to take certain measures to do it. There, I think the process of education of the people, of bringing them more into conformity with the rules of rules-based society, to good governance, and all that will come. So I'm not giving any answers, but I'm saying that this is how we are, this is what we are, this is how we are probably going to react. Now, it is for you to figure out where you can help us. I think they have mentioned, the other participants have mentioned a couple of good areas. Yes, the digital divide, you need to help us to cover that, because that will speed up the process of what we have been going through for the last 50 years. It has its downsides. It will have security. I mean, the process of people getting too much information and not knowing how to process the information intelligently will be a problem. That is where the war between news and fake news comes in. And how do you manage that? I think the government is still struggling with that. They thought they had an answer. Now they're discovering that that answer is perhaps not the right answer. They'll have to figure out what is the right answer, because no government in the world has been able to figure that out yet. So I end there. Sorry if I tested your patience.
No, that's all right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you for that very detailed analysis of where we are and the reasons why. I mean, you even sort of took the macro view of Admiral Mahan and sort of laser focused it on Bangladesh. And very right to say that you did not provide answers as much as you asked questions, and that was what it was meant to have been. Ambassador Anne van Leeuwen, I'll give you the floor for the next 10 minutes or so, in order for you to be able to respond to the points raised or any fresh points that you may wish to make on your own. Ambassador?
Fantastic, thank you so much. I mean, where to start? Well, maybe start with the last. My friend Tariq, it's a pleasure to be your friend and to be considered as such, and that is reciprocal. It's great to hear you. And I was listening to you, and I said, you claim you're an old man, but you are maybe the youngest in our midst, in the sense that you are, we should say, positive spirit and energy, and this combination of your experience and your freshness and intellectual questioning is so inspiring. So I'm looking forward to our next meeting and continuing the conversation. You mentioned the youth divide and the youth dividends. And that's a very positive thing, of course. I mean, the fact that there is a new generation coming and looking not so much backwards, but forward, that makes us positive. And despite all the challenges that you rightly identified, I share with you that we have to soldier on, so to speak. And of course, we are marching together in that sense because we have so much in common. That is a very general remark. Professor, I mean, Mohsin, just one point that I would like to pick on the very elaborate introduction that you gave and remarks that you made, because I failed to address it in my observations, and that's the very important point of the Rohingya crisis that you mentioned and the international response to it. And I couldn't agree more with you than what you mentioned about the importance of identifying and recognizing the burden that the Rohingya crisis is for Bangladesh as a country, and particularly for the host community. So we cannot begin we cannot overestimate how much that is. And I think it's important also to underline here that the international community in the Netherlands as well, on my behalf, I'm speaking then, whenever we are discussing the Rohingya crisis, whenever we are visiting Cox's Bazar, I personally always find it of utmost importance that we pay attention to the host community, and that we're not only going to see the refugee camps and see the refugees, but that we also identify the host community as being very much affected. And it goes also, of course, for our assistance that we provide, and that's via UNHCR. The Netherlands is one of the main core contributors to UNHCR, and most of our funding is in that sense indirectly, but also our direct support to Cox's Bazar and the region and the refugees is also on equal footing with support to the host community. So I'm grateful that you mentioned that, and I'm happy to take the opportunity to underline that and just to stress that we are exactly on the same position there. One point in the remarks of Professor Yasmin, you mentioned the Rotterdam port. It's indeed great that we now have this direct connection and this direct sailing without interruptions between the Chattanooga and Rotterdam port. And that's not only for the RMG sector that you mentioned, an important point, but looking forward, particularly, of course, with a view to the huge potential for agri-foods and perishable products. It's very important that we have those shorter leadways from Bangladesh to the European market, we see a very bright future in that respect for, well, let's say even the mango season, as we just have experienced, and the great opportunities that also being in Europe can have your fantastic fruits and vegetables, particularly the mangoes. I mean, just as a small anecdote, before I had ever set foot in Bangladesh, so let's say a year and 3 months ago or so, when I was in the Netherlands preparing myself for my posting year, I got a very friendly call of who's now my friend, Riaz Hamidullah, my counterpart, Bangladesh ambassador in The Hague, who said, "Where are you?" we have to meet. And before we meet in person, I see to it that my driver gets to wherever you are in the Netherlands and bring you a fresh box of Bangladeshi mangoes, so that you can experience how good the products are, and that you can look forward to being in Bangladesh. And indeed, the last couple of weeks, I have had mangoes every day. And with this direct connection between Zettendam and Rotterdam, we can look forward to having mangoes in the Netherlands even more. Dr. Iftikhar, yes, you made a very important point also with, of course, the LCD graduation, the middle income country status, and the repercussions that it has for Bangladesh. This, of course, is not a bilateral issue between the Netherlands and Bangladesh, as trade policy is a communitary thing and then done in Brussels on behalf of the EU. But it's, of course, elementary, you know, and this is one of the main things that the government of Bangladesh and the private sector in Bangladesh is really about needs to work on. There's, of course, a whole set of technical issues involved in this transition from what we now have, the Everything But Arms program, towards this GSP plus. There's a lot of technical things that I'm not going to discuss in detail. But there's another set of complex points, and that is more about the sustainable development and the good governance part of it for qualifying to a GSP plus. And I mean, I cannot stress enough how important it is that private sector and the government of Bangladesh are really paying attention to this and not seeing this graduation as kind of a risk, but as an opportunity and as a challenge that one should take to improve the good governance and the sustainability requirements that come with the GSP plus. I'm confident that will be done. I think those are the main points that I took because I'm also looking at the clock and I might better wrap up. But let me conclude with just saying how much I learned this morning, how grateful I am for all the remarks that you have made. And in the first place, of course, to the Erasmus Foundation to taking the initiative to invite me to speaking in this series and to have this exchange with you all. It was really a great pleasure to be in your midst, and I look forward to continuing our exchange and our conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you for your contribution in the entire effort, entire Cosmos effort this morning. It was an extremely stimulating discussion. It did not remain confined to bilateral relations, nor did we expect it to, but it covered a very wide spectrum of activities of the two communities in both bilaterally, of course, and on a regional and global setting. So thank you very much, and thank you all the participants for the points that you have made. All of these have been registered, of course, and we will find our way through the media to the community. And sometimes we we also record reactions of the community, and we will keep you apprised of how this interaction takes place. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone from my side. My role is Muruda Silva. Thank you.
Thank you all for such an insightful and engaging discussion on Bangladesh-Netherlands relations. It is our hope that today's session can play its part to set the ball rolling in a forward direction in the coming days. On behalf of the Cosmos Foundation, I would like to express our profound appreciation to Ambassador Leon for his brilliant presentation. Our distinguished panel of discussants, along with our chairman, Mr. Inayatullah Khan, are also owed a special thanks for their valuable contribution, which has been a key factor in the roundtable success. Last but not least, I must thank our distinguished chair, Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry, for steering the discussion with skill and stewardship as always. In conclusion, may we join our hands in applauding this very successful event today. Wishing you all good health and all the best.